Thank you for joining the Risk GovCon podcast for the third and final episode on the National Institute of Standards and Technology, commonly referred to as Nist, specifically Nist 800-171. Just the sound of this requirement makes some government contractors want to hide and run for cover. Tackling the myth, compliance may not be that difficult, almost easy when broken down the right way. Join us as we explore the labyrinth of Nist compliance and the protection of unclassified information with our guest, Ben Brooks, Vice President of Beryllium InfoSec Collaboration, on this episode of the Risk GovCon podcast. I'm your host, Brian Smith. Hello, this is Brian Smith, your host for Risk GovCon, brought to you by Risk Reconnaissance, the podcast that focuses exclusively on government and defense contractors, all things business. We cover business development, risk and insurance, as well as contractual compliance. Try to make your business that much better and more efficient. And with me today on our third segment is Ben Brooks from Beryllium InfoSec Collaborative out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so far in the first two episodes, we were able to cover what NIST 800-171 is. And then we gave some, in the second episode, we provided some examples on what has happened good, what's happened bad, and some ways you can actually solve that issue on your own. And now the third episode is going to be exactly that. What can you do to implement a solution to this requirement for unclassified information as a government contractor? So without further ado, let's go ahead and get rolling on that. So Ben Brooks, take it away.
Hey, thanks for having me again, Brian. I really appreciate it. So templates for success with NIST 800-171 should always start with, does this actually apply to my organization? Sometimes we're going to find that prime contractors, in their zeal to ensure their own compliance, because this is a flow-down requirement, right? In their zeal to ensure their own compliance, are just kind of blanket asking everybody if they're in compliance with the NIST 800-171 requirements. So they'll send out a flyer or something like that that says, are you? Or they might actually ask you to attach your system security plan and your plan of action of milestones documents. And so we need to determine if this is actually right for us. And again, we pinged on this a little bit, but if you're just doing commercial off the shelf, whatever it is, manufacturing or services, basically you're selling this to anybody and the government likes it so much that they're going to buy that exact same service from you, then this might not apply.
You know, it's interesting that you said that because I handle commercial insurance. Mm-hmm. And again, it's for government and defense contractors. And what I find from the flow down from the prime is they blanket their requests. These huge numbers that we might have a contract for $500,000 and they're looking for a $5 million limit on insurance. And that's because that's their standard. That's what they have, and that's what they need. But is it realistic? Is it fair to say to that subcontractor, hey, you got to increase your limit to $5 million. It's going to cost this much money. Mm-hmm. Same thing here with NIST. It's a flow down. So what you're saying is you can actually challenge that by saying, listen, we don't have this exposure.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it should be a pretty good conversation, assuming I'm laughing here, assuming that the prime even knows who should have it and who shouldn't. So now you got two balances, right? Two balances, right, so to speak.
Exactly. And oftentimes, again, they're just doing this because it's a CYA measure, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting that you brought it up, because information security really is just another form of risk management for any organization. How are you operating? What risks are you taking by operating in that regard? Mm-hmm. So,
I stopped you there. So just go ahead and continue on. We were talking about the flow down from the prime to the subcontractor, and then we went off on a bit of a tangent. So what were you going to say next on this?
Well, we asked the question, does this apply to us or not? And so let's assume that it does for the sake of moving this forward. So at this point, you have really three options. You have the do-it-yourself option, you have the hybrid option, and then you have, can I get somebody to do it for me option. And I want to caveat that last one. Nobody can ever do it 100% for you. Even the best solution out there still requires participation and ownership by the organization that's doing it, mm-hmm. right? So you can't just push it off on somebody else to manage for you. But you absolutely can delegate some of that. So the first one is the do-it-yourself,
Okay.
and that's when you grab the NIST 800-171 from the National Institute of Standards and Technology website for it, and make sure it's the latest revision. And you download the documents that are required, and you start going through and assessing how your organization does business in regard to these controls and handling controlled unclassified information. And so you simply start by looking at what's already being done and how you're going to implement some of these, really, all joking aside, some of these big ticket implementations.
And something I want to bring out to the audience as well, in the link included in this podcast, there's going to be a 21 question questionnaire that's going to assist you. This is provided by Ben. That's going to assist you. 22 questions, so it's not as easy as we thought. 22 questions, and it's going to help you identify exactly what is unclassified information, because it's not as easy as it sounds. I mean, there's a lot to it. So you'll see that as well in this podcast and the information below. But go ahead, Ben.
Sure. So moving ahead, one of the first things that people can do to really boost their information security for their entire organization, and is one of the requirements under NIST 800-171, is that all users of information systems get what we call general user security awareness training, right? And so what that is it's, hey, these are the threats that are out there, and this is why it's important to know what a phishing attack looks like, understand what social engineering looks like, and how you handle that as somebody who's just answering the phones or doing their job on a day-to-day basis. You're not that CISSP out there or that information security professional or IT professional. That's not what most people's jobs are. But you still have to be cognizant that the bad guys are going to try and use you as their foothold into the organization. And so that security awareness training, how to handle that is a great return on security investment that organization can make. And it's a requirement. Go forth and conquer, right? The next one is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is, for a lot of people, the easiest reminder of what that is like when you're signing into a Gmail account. If it makes you plug in the little number after you've typed in your password,
right?
That's multi-factor authentication, and it doesn't have to be something like that. It could be a biometric solution like a thumbprint scanner, but doing that provides a second key to the lock into your logins. And oftentimes organizations have what they call single sign-on technologies, which allow somebody to sign in one time to all the services or a suite of services within the organization. If you have only a password on there and somebody has a bad password that the ne'er-do-wells can easily break into, doesn't look good. But with multi-factor, there's a very little chance that the bad guy is going to be able to thwart both of those and get into the organization. So I'll be one of the first guys to tell you, I love free security stuff because some of it works really well. And so Google, for instance, the multi-factor authentication, free. Microsoft OneDrive / Office, free multi-factor authentication. Just turn it on. Make sure your IT guys have it turned on.
No kidding.
Absolutely.
See, there's things like that I don't think people realize how, and now we're simplifying it. We don't want to take away from the fact that it's not easy, so to speak,
right?
But it is possible,
right,
to just have some of these tools that can make it that much more safe. But I love the idea about training your people, the first line of defense, and then having the
multi-factor authentication. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. And there's still 108 controls left that you have to implement, not the least of which is, again, hiring on that security professional or designating a security professional within your organization, somebody who's going to do the monitoring, somebody who's going to audit what IT is doing for these implementations. And it really helps to have a program champion, somebody who's going to say, how are we doing with handling the paper copy? For instance, a manufacturer who's making a special part for the DoD, they might have a traveler that goes around with them throughout the entire manufacturing floor that has controlled unclassified information in it. Somebody needs to identify the process of how to handle that so that it doesn't get into the wrong hands, make sure that it's locked up in an appropriate place at night.
Really? So
That
it's almost
part of
like
this.
operational security, OPSEC.
You
in
better
a unit.
believe it.
And then, but the people that are working on the ground, on the floor, they may not have to be compliant in that respect because that's the only person that has that information that's relevant to this standard. As a government contracting executive, have you ever found yourself training your insurance broker on your government contracting operations so they might get the right coverage you really need? Who's working for who? It may be time to consider the professionals with Risk Reconnaissance. Our unique blend of military experience, coupled with a deep understanding of risk and insurance, creates a client experience that is second to none. We understand a wide variety of GovCon considerations. You see, we embrace OCONUS operations, the multiple contract opportunities your team prepares for, and the time-sensitive delivery of workers' compensation rates needed to complete your proposals. Interested in learning more? Visit our website, theriskrecon.com. That's THERISKRECON.com for more details and to start a conversation. With Risk Reconnaissance, it's simple. You support the warfighter, we support you.
Okay. And that's one way of doing it. Some organizations, they're going to make every person on the manufacturing floor what we call a controlled unclassified information handler, somebody who is using that information. Other organizations are going to designate a few people who handle that organization, and that's all. Right? So there are a lot of ways to skin this cat. So do it yourself. You have to really look at those things, and then you have to figure out, okay, how much spend are we going to put in this, and how much time and effort are we going to drop into this?
Gotcha.
And that's very daunting for all but the largest organizations, quite frankly. So then we have the hybrid solution, and it still starts with, is this thing right for us? Do we need to be CUI compliant, right, with NIST 800-171? And what that looks like is, okay, I know I can't do this all myself. Can I outsource some of this? Can I get a service to help me with specific parts of it? For instance, the most expensive parts, like security operations. Who's doing the monitoring? What pieces of technology do we have in place to monitor the flow of information in and out of the organization, right? So there are what we call Security Operations Center as a Service services out there where you can say, great, we're going to open up a VPN connection into your SOC, Security Operations Center, and we're going to pipe all the CUI information through there before it goes out anywhere, and you guys are going to monitor this thing in accordance with the NIST 800-171. It could be a very expensive contract. It might be a relatively affordable contract. But again, it all depends on who it is that you're hiring to do this.
So it really depends on, to use a term from insurance, your risk tolerance.
That's right.
You know, what's the affordability of it? What is the timeline, the amount of time, money, and resources that are going to be dedicated to it if you didn't go with the hybrid method?
Exactly right. And of course, you're still going to have to end up with cataloging all of the ways that you do this, again, in your system security plan and your plan of action and milestones. You have to make sure that this is also company policy. You can't just put this down and say, oh, they know what they're doing. If you don't write it down, does that stand up in court?
Well, if you write it down, doesn't that assume you got to test it?
Exactly. And that's actually part of the NIST 800-171, that you actually test some of these things. So it's pretty good. And then the last, of course, is the 100%, and we'll asterisk that by you still have to have a program champion. You still have to do the program, right? But the 100% solution, which what it does is it allows an organization to hire on somebody to bring in all the technology, all of the process, all of the templates for the documentation, the system security plan, help them with the audits, and that means there's also an IT organization or an IT resource that's actually doing this stuff, and then there's a separate security function as well, along with all the testing and everything else that we've talked about. So that has to meet all 110 of those controls of the 14 control families in the NIST 800-171. And so far, I'm pretty proud of this one, but we're the only organization that has provided that 100% solution. And we were recognized by the Ohio State University in that regard. But can you bring in enough resources so that it looks like a 99% on the hybrid? Yeah, you probably could.
Mm-hmm.
But how affordable is it?
There seems to be, I go to Huntsville quite a bit. We're actually in Atlanta. I go to Huntsville quite a bit, and there are numerous consultants that are working on this for companies that are there. Such a large concentration of contractors there. And you're mentioning the only 100% one. That's interesting to me. My thought is, how do you know somebody's good? Really. If we said Wild West earlier.
Yep.
You hire somebody, hire a company. How do you know?
Yeah, how do you know they're not the next Doc McGillicuddy coming in selling snake oil, right?
Yeah.
It's a big problem because there are a lot of folks out there who, not maliciously, I don't think, are selling pieces to the solution, but they just don't understand that folks don't grasp all of the nuances around these implementations, right? Mm-hmm. So the question that you should ask is, all right, consultant or company that's promising me that this will make me compliant, show me in the Nist 800-171 of the 110 controls and the 14 families, which one of these that you're going to, or which of these that you're going to satisfy, and then how. Show me that, and that way I can know definitively, because then it becomes a checklist,
okay,
right? I mean, you still have to do the programmatic aspects, but if you're bringing somebody in to help you, make sure that they can show you definitively how they're meeting those controls.
Gotcha.
Right?
Well, it sounds like you've got quite a bit of things that you guys have successfully been able to accomplish. And I'm sure there's other contractors out there, companies that can do it as well. You mentioned the questions to ask. We talked about MITRE.
Yeah.
This is a free, available information gathering. Could you talk about MITRE?
Yeah. MITRE is a not-for-profit organization that basically their job is to help organizations here in the United States implement the right levels of technology into their organization. And they are kind of like Nist's action arm. They say, man, Nist has given us this cookbook, but really how do we make this recipe work for us? MITRE does a great job in partnering with those organizations. So for instance, after you're done with this Nist 800-171, you're going to be looking at yourself and saying, oh, we just did all of this stuff. Now what do we do for the rest of the organization? We get it. We safeguarded CUI, but what about our payment information? What about our HR information? Any health records that we have on site or credit cards?
Right.
What are we doing for that? MITRE has a lot of help in that regard. They have people who are invested in ensuring the success of an organization in implementing cybersecurity. Great resource, mitre.org.
And the thing is you brought up about the information for the employees and data that they have. When I go out and I talk with future clients, let's call it that, they tell me that what kind of liability protections they have on cyber. And it is amazing to me on who doesn't have cyber liability coverage. Well, we don't need it. We're in the cloud. We don't have any exposure to that. And then I say, well, do you plug in? Do you have a variety of questions? Are you on a network? Do you use Wi-Fi? And of course the answers are yes. And I said, well, then you are exposed. The ransomware, the malware. The city of Atlanta was held hostage for $65,000. It cost them, I think, $2 million to fix everything, right? $65,000, I think it was, $64,000. They held the billing hostage for the water department or something like that. It was a thing. So there's coverages out there for these companies that I think it's missed all too often because they have this mentality that it's not going to ever hit us. And I think you summed that up real well. Ben, if people wanted to get a hold of you and learn more about Beryllium InfoSec Collaborative, how could they do that?
Yeah, they can look us up online, berylliuminfosec.com. You can find us in Google, or you can check out quicktrack.com as well, and that's our 100% solution. So,
Wait. So you have a packaged. So I didn't know this. So you have something called QuickTrack. What is QuickTrack? Is it hardware? What does it look like? What is it?
The easiest way to describe it is it's like the Betty Crocker cake mix of Nist 800-171. Everything that you need in one box, but you still gotta add water and stir. So we'll help you. We'll provide all the technology. We'll provide all the programmatic aspects, and we'll do the consulting work to bring people to the point where they're at an acceptable implementation as well as being compliant. And so they're going to be in that sweet spot where they're going to have to do a few things on their own, of course, but at that point it's just a programmatic aspect.
Now, how do we find that again?
So you can go to quicktrack.com, spelled CUI, just like controlled unclassified information, CKTRAC.com.
Excellent. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's 3-segment piece on cybersecurity with my guest, Ben Brooks from Beryllium InfoSec Collaborative out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've learned a lot today. We've covered a great amount of information, and there are going to be some links associated with the podcast that may assist you and your organization in remedying these issues if you are faced with them, and also an opportunity to ask questions. We're going to have a way for you to reach out to Ben so that if you have a specific question, then you could reach out to him directly and find out more about his firm and what he might be able to do for yours. This is Brian Smith with the Risk GovCon podcast, sponsored by Risk Reconnaissance, and I thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining the Risk GovCon podcast for the third and final episode on the National Institute of Standards and Technology, commonly referred to as Nist. A special thanks goes out to our expert guest, Ben Brooks of Beryllium InfoSec Compliance, for his insight and valuable information. If interested, you can reach Ben by phone or email from the details listed within the content of our podcast. For the Risk GovCon podcast, I'm your host, Brian Smith.